a friend of mine came to me and wanted a way to display her new fancy soaps behind her sink. And I figured, well, let's see what I can come up with. Hey, my name is Joe. Welcome to Shepherd's Workbench. We're going to start by breaking down our rough stock. So this is a giant piece of pecan wood, and we only need a small section, so I'm going to use my track saw to cut off the end. Now this end is broken, and you can see I thought, how am I going to rip this through the table saw? But this was better? Maybe? Anyway, I took it to my joiner and I jointed one edge and then ran it through the table saw to cut it into strips. These strips are going to match the walnut piece that's going to go in the middle. So I only needed 4 strips, but there was only much left and the rest can go in the firewood. Then I took it over to the planer and dimensioned it down so that I can get good glue surfaces on each of the pieces. They ended up being about 1/2 inch each strip, and 2 strips were going to go on either side of the walnut in the center. So here's the idea. This is going to be the center and the feature part. She wanted to keep all these knots and stuff in here, and we're going to stabilize that with epoxy. But first, I'm going to glue it up. Since I have to run this through the planer anyway, I'm going to wait till my epoxy's in and cures before I run it through. So hopefully you guys can kind of see some contrast on the camera. Let me zoom in for you. That's better. So you can see we're going to have a little bit of this figure with the bug holes and things like that, and some of the spalting all the way through it. And then we'll have the pecan on either side to be able to add the contrast that we need. So we're going to glue this up, then we'll put some epoxy in, and then we'll shape it and router out all of our pieces. So for this glue up, I'm using Titebond 2. We're going to get it through, make sure we have enough glue throughout the entire surface, and then clamp it up really good. And if you don't give it the thumbs up, is it really clamped that well? All right, so on this piece, we've got a bunch of these bug holes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to seal them with epoxy. And apparently my glutton for punishment, Orem is really cheap. So I'm going to continue to go with the JB Weld. If you watched my planter stand video, which will be up here, I had a little problem with this epoxy before, but I don't feel like buying new stuff, so we're just going to go with it. Alright, so all I did is I brushed down a little bit around the inside of where I'm eventually going to pour. That's hopefully going to seal off the sides because this wood is kind of punky, meaning it's kind of like cork material almost. So I want to be able to seal it off so then when I pour it, it doesn't like pollute the epoxy. It's not going to be clear, but it's not going to be full of junk floating in it and stuff. So we're going to let this cure, and then we're going to come back and we'll fill it with more epoxy later. Now, like I said before, this walnut strip in the middle is really punky, as they call it, or cork. So I figured I can explain this for a second while you watch me struggle to open this can. This is Minwax Wood Hardener. I needed a way to harden up the punky parts or the rotten parts of this walnut, and this is a really good stuff. It's real thin and viscous. You could use a penetrating epoxy as well. Once that dries, we're going to sand it down to 120. I only am going to 120 because we still have to route out our grooves before final sanding, and we're going to do another coat of our wood hardener before we finish it. So only in 120 at this point. Then we had to cut out a little recess for this to fit behind the sink. I needed somewhere for that sink to go and got it perfectly in the center. Then I cut out a little piece of plywood. This is a 3-inch circle that I cut out on my bandsaw and refined it with some sandpaper. You can see my bandsaw blade kerf there. But I did this in 2 passes, one shallow and then a little bit deeper. And I wanted to do this because we have that epoxy and that punky wood inside and didn't want to mess it up. So now we're going to sand again up to 120 to prep for our wood hardener. Because that stuff is super thin, it does cause the wood grain to expand a little bit. but we want to make sure that we get a smooth surface so that we have less sanding through the hardener. And this is the stuff. It's by Minwax. It's wood hardener. Again, make sure that you're wearing a respirator and using protective equipment for this. Using a foam brush is not a good idea. It actually dissolves the foam brush, so you don't want to use it, which is why you see me splashing it on and rubbing it with a rag. I did this also so I could leave a lot on there for the wood to really soak it up. Now it's time to sand up to 220. We want to get this really smooth and make sure you break all of your corners, get it all really nice and easy to the touch, because this is probably going to get touched a lot with soap on it. Then we're going to do 3 coats of Minwax water-based polyacrylic. This is a clear matte finish. If you want to see how I do this or how I get a really glass smooth finish, I'll have a video link right here to where I walk through all of the steps and how I get a really perfect finish every time. Always make sure when you're finishing to finish the bottom side first, or the non-show side first. That way when you have it on standoffs like this, it doesn't mess up your top finish. And with that, it was all done. I thought this came out really great. The customer loved it, and the epoxy wasn't the greatest quality, as I said before, but it turned out awesome. With the contrast with the pecan wood and the walnut, it just turned out great, and it matched perfectly. The finish came out great, and I really loved this project. I thought it was really, really beautiful. I did add some rubber feet on this afterwards to help it stand off a little bit. But thank you for joining us on this video with Shepherd's Workbench.